last year and a half, there has been this strange thing that might have escaped some of your listeners, which is that there's this weird, I think a lot of people who want to become scientists, who want to become doctors, those are harder roads now. And it has to do with the fact that there's some force. I know I kind of feel like I sound like a kook saying this, but there is in fact hostility to knowledge, and it makes it harder to develop drugs, harder to develop cures, and harder for young people to come up and be successful.
Yeah, can we get into that? Tell us a little bit more.
Oh, it is a really hard time to be a scientist right now. Okay, so...
Welcome back to Big Asian Energy. You know, on this show, we've had the privilege of sitting down with some incredible Asian American thinkers, scientists, researchers, and builders, like people who have created groundbreaking change in the world around us. But here's something I've been thinking about. There's not as many of us in this field, in our community, that makes the leap from seeing the problem to actually stepping in to fix it. Many of us study it, many of us write about it. And today's guest is a Princeton professor of neuroscience who saw a broken system, built the science to prove it, took his findings all the way to the Supreme Court, and then decided that wasn't enough. So now he's running for Congress. And yes, one point, when I was doing research, I found out he ate a live cricket on CNN. And if he's open, we will absolutely be getting into that. Now, before I introduce him, I just want to say, you know, Big Asian Energy, we've always been here to talk about Asian Americans who refused to accept the ceilings that we were handed. And today is no different. So if you're new to the show, welcome. Genuinely happy that you're here. This is a show where we interview Asian American leaders and ask them questions that, you know, some of us never get the chance to ask. How did you actually get here? Not the polished version, but the real story. So today's guest is a son of Taiwanese immigrants who came to this country with almost nothing and went on to enroll at Caltech at 15 years old, earning his PhD from neuroscience at Stanford, became a full professor at Princeton, where his research fundamentally changed how we understand autism. And that work is deeply personal because the reason he started it had to do with his own younger sister who spent years without a proper diagnosis. Now, I'm just going to stop right there because there's so much we can jump into. Welcome to the show, Dr. Sam Wang.
Thank you, John, for having me on. This is very exciting for me. It's been just, you know, you have a great program, and I'm delighted to join.
Oh, it's our pleasure and honor. Now, I would love to dive straight into it because your background and your story is very interesting. 15 years old, going to Caltech, that in of itself is worth this whole episode. But I'm curious.
A long time ago.
I'm curious, how did you go from being a scientist into going into politics? Like, that's not a shift I see many people making, especially in our demographic.
Look, when I was a kid, when I was born, my parents had a birth book, and my dad wrote down what he wanted for me, which is that he wanted me to get my PhD in science by the age of 25. And I missed by half a year. So I think I was 26. And so I didn't quite hit that mark. But that was what he wanted for me. My parents, like you said, they immigrated to the United States in the early 60s. They fled communist China in 1949. And they came to the U.S. It's the immigrant story. And so I grew up, it's funny. My dad said that he didn't really push me very hard. He just thought I loved science, which is true. And I built a career in science. And like you say, I built a career in neuroscience, working on autism. We can get into that. But, as a scientist, scientists discover things, but we also build things and we think of solutions. This is what scientists do. And you are right. Scientists usually do that in their domain of science. I've taken it in different directions, developing early diagnostics for autism. My sister got a late diagnosis, and I thought over my career that AI and all these new tools that have come up in the last few years allow us to make early diagnosis, especially in communities that don't have those resources. And so, single moms, parents in places that are kind of remote, these places can use those tools. So I use that to build a tool. And that was my science career. It still is my science career. In addition to that, now I use my science to build other things. And so our democracy here in the United States is kind of rickety. And so I am now working on tools to help make that work better, whether it be gerrymandering or making Congress itself work. So I think my story, I live inside myself. And so to my mind, it makes sense. I'm a scientist. I build things. I fix things. I solve problems. And it so happens that I am not so good at noticing when I'm out of my lane. And so I have I'm kind of all over the road. And now what I'm hoping to do is take my science to Washington. So that's where I'm headed. I
I
hope.
I mean I love the way you put that is that we don't stay in one lane. And I actually love it when people don't stay in one lane because it really breaks that stereotype for many of us, right? Like we oftentimes, especially in Asian American communities, we have that like, oh, like just, be good at what you do and keep your head down, don't make waves. And you're
Yep.
doing almost the exact opposite of that. So what was the personal reason? I'm kind of curious. Like, what first of all, how did you go from neuroscience to studying basically autism? Like, that makes sense to me. But how did that go on into gerrymandering?
Sure. Okay. Well, the neuroscience to autism, as you said, that's just a step of studying adult brains to understanding how brains develop and learn in the first place. And so we can get into that. But I think you're thinking about like, what about that other turn that I took? I will tell you about that. So I would say that it started when you're an academic, you usually finish your PhD. And if you're in biological sciences, maybe you do a postdoc for a few years. And if things go well, you go and become a professor. That's the usual route. Under current conditions in modern America over the last couple of years, that route is kind of broken, honestly. And we can get into that because of attacks on science, attacks on research in the last year. So, yeah.
Yeah, can we get into that? Tell us a little bit more.
Oh, it is a really hard time to be a scientist right now. Okay, so in the last year and a half, there have been attacks on research. I've built my career as a researcher learning about how the brain learns. I have talented students and postdocs. They come from around the world. They go to various places. They do great things. They go become professors. They go start companies. I have a whole company on using AI to diagnose autism. I have amazing people because, science is a team sport. But in
Hmm.
the last year and a half, there has been this strange thing that might have escaped some of your listeners, which is that there's this weird, I don't know what to call it other than an attack on knowledge that the current presidential administration has been very skeptical about the role of knowledge in building better lives for people. And
Hmm.
they're making it much harder through bureaucratic tricks for people to get grants. And my students and postdocs are starting to get kind of pessimistic because it is harder to build the life that I built. I mean, you talk about me going to college at 15, getting my PhD, becoming a successful scientist. That's a harder road these days. And so I think a lot of people who want to become scientists, who want to become doctors, those are harder roads now. And it has to do with the fact that there's some force. I know I kind of feel like I sound like a kook saying this, but there is in fact hostility to knowledge, and it makes it harder to develop drugs, harder to develop cures, and harder for young people to come up and be successful. So that's a thing that's looming on the horizon, and I think it gets in the way of the American dream, right? Because we're a nation of immigrants
Hmm.
that produces knowledge and builds things. That's the entire country is like that, not just immigrants from Asian countries, but just the whole country is a country of innovation. So it's actually a pretty weird time to be a scientist, and that has a little bit to do with why I'm doing what I'm doing, running for office. So the difficulties of scientists everywhere are in fact a big part of the American story at this moment in history.
Wow. But when
Yeah.
you were coming up and you were at Princeton, being a professor, doing this research on neurodivergence and all this, I mean, you actually created some really brilliant research. I remember you started also the Princeton Gerrymandering Project and all that kind of things. What was the moment that you decided to make that, to pick that up as a topic?
Okay. So, well, gerrymandering. So I'll tell you a little story, which is that when I was a postdoc, I took a year off to go work in Washington, D.C. I applied for a fellowship from the American Association for the Advancement of Science. I worked on congressional staff. I worked for a Congress from Texas, Lloyd Doggett. I worked for Senator Ted Kennedy. So I was what they call a Kennedy staffer. And I worked there on science research policy. I worked on K through 12 technology. I worked on what it means to support the NSF. I worked on all these things. And so I got a little taste of how you could work in Washington to change people's lives. And I
Mhm.
know, I think these days it sounds kind of cynical, but I developed a view that government can help people and can really build better lives for everyone. Okay, so that was in the mid 90s. So now fast forward, at Princeton as a professor, I got really interested in how we elect our leaders, how we build power. And I started getting interested in how power is not distributed equally in the United States, how some voters have more power than others. Like if you live in a swing state like Pennsylvania, you have more power than if you live in my state, New Jersey, which is, heavily Democratic. And so you have more influence depending on where you live. And I just got really interested in the idea that we don't all have equal power. And that gets us to gerrymandering. In 2012, I discovered this really weird bug in our democracy where politicians draw lines and they pick their voters instead of us voters picking our politicians. And that's called gerrymandering, when politicians draw the lines to build themselves an advantage. And I thought, well, that is just wrong. I just really offended me. And so I started a project to try to stop it. I had a team of scholars, young students and staffers and researchers, and we were looking for ways to stop it. We tried to stop it by writing law articles and helping legal scholars. I wrote a Supreme Court brief that's like a little document that you write and you send to the Supreme Court in a case. And we said, okay, Supreme Court, there's a way that you can stop this. It's by basically applying a basic symmetry principle that if two parties switch places, they should in some sense switch the amount of power that they have. So like basically a kind of a principle of like when kids share things, I cut and you choose, right? The idea that we should both have an equal say. Mm-hmm. And I applied that principle. The Supreme Court said, okay, that's a good idea. Chief Justice John Roberts, included my brief in his opinion. So I was like, okay, good, good Asian CV builder. Like, the Supreme Court, Chief Justice included my opinion in his opinion. And then he said, but we're not going to do anything about it. And I was like, okay, so I buffed my resume by having a Supreme Court justice cite my work, and he did not make things fairer. And I just, at that point, my head kind of exploded. And I realized that it was time to get in deeper and to start working on that problem deeper and deeper. So now my team started working against gerrymandering in every state. We started working state by state. We fought it in Michigan, North Carolina, here in New Jersey, where I live. We started working against gerrymandering through the state laws. But and so that was actually how that started. And that has gone pretty well. But in the last year, gerrymandering has flared up again. In the last year, states have started redrawing their congressional plans mid-decade, which they're not supposed to. Like the tradition is to wait until there's a census, redraw, and then leave it in place for 10 years and do it again 10 years later, because districts have to have the same population. And so now this fundamental principle of waiting 10 years has kind of blown up. And so we're getting into this situation where politicians keep on picking their voters. And if they don't like the outcome, they just pick new voters. And this is like getting a mulligan in golf. Like you get to do it over and over and over again. And so here these politicians are like doing do-overs. And so all of this has just driven me to the brink. And I got to say, all these things that are making our democracy work less well, this is one of them. And I thought, you know what? I'm a scientist. We came up with standards for fair maps. I've been doing it from the outside. And now I'm thinking, well, okay, I think I better take it to Congress and run myself as a candidate to try to take it to the next level. So it went from the Supreme Court to the states. And I feel like my team is doing some good, but I just have this drive inside me to make elections fairer for people. And that is, getting back to why I would possibly go from being a scientist to go running for office. It's because I want to make elections fairer for everyone. And that is a thing that's inside me that needs to get out.
I can absolutely see that. I mean, and first and foremost, thank you so much for explaining that, because I had to go and look up what is happening in gerrymandering before I
there's a lot. It's a whole story. It's like this obscure thing that sounds technical, but actually turns out to determine whether we have a say.
Which is nuts, I think, right? Like, because essentially the idea, the very principles of the systems of democracy and the way that we approach the principles of fairness is that our votes should all be, our say should all be equally weighted. So Absolutely. If they are able to redraw, I was watching these videos of like how gerrymandering is, and it's mind blowing, by the way. If you haven't done much research, or if this is a new concept to you, I highly recommend go and look up. There's some really great instructional, explanational videos that explain why gerrymandering can essentially turn, let's say, like a district that is, whatever side it is, left or right, whatever it is, left, blue, red, or whatever it is. And kind of flip it around because of the way that they draw the maps. And yet this is something that we still have not looked at, as you say. I love the way you put it, as a
Yeah.
glitch, but perhaps a
Yeah, a bug.
manipulation even.
And there's a way to fix it. Turns out there's a way to fix it. It's kind of like these web ads, like, build muscle with this one weird trick. So the one weird
Drink
trick here
protein milk.
is yes, no, you were like, before we went on, you got your protein milk there, and I'm like, okay, I'm not sure I want that weird trick, but okay, fine. You know what? It might work.
Listeners, we were talking about me drinking protein milk before we started the recording.
It's so crazy. It just might work. But in the case of gerrymandering, the one trick that actually will work is for Congress to pass citizen commissions that take the power away from politicians and impose these citizen commissions that are like little juries. And the juries meet every 10 years, and they do it in every state. And having a jury-like system is demonstrated to work. It has been shown to work in Michigan, in California, in Arizona, in Colorado. We know it works. I wrote a giant long law article. There's the Asian resume builder in me again. But anyway, I wrote a big law article, and a student of mine, and I wrote a big article showing that the one thing that works reliably is to set up independent citizen commissions. And so, if I go to Congress, I am going to go introduce a bill that implements that. And it's a bill that has been written previously by other leading thinkers in this area. And so that's a way I can do some good. Like, I can take my nerdy little area of knowledge, right? Because I have like areas of knowledge in medicine, in democracy, in gerrymandering. And I want to take that and go be somebody to help implement it. And like, instead of being in the back room, being, kind of a support staff member, I mean, people like that play an essential role. So I want to take the work that people like that do and be one of those people and go to Congress and help solve a problem. Because in fact, we got to build some new things in Congress to get that place working better.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I would love to rewind a little bit in your journey.
Yep.
You talked about your upbringing. I mean, your story is really the quintessential, I would say, Asian immigrant story, right? Like your parents fled communism, came to America, became librarians, and your dad wanted to be a scientist, right? I believe that's part of the,
that's right.
How did that influence your journey in going into sciences and now politics? I mean, did that relate to that at all?
If I go back, I guess I normally don't get into this level of detail, but let me tell you about my childhood a little bit. Mm-hmm. My parents came to the U.S. and they bounced around the Midwest, because when people come to the United States to be scholars, they go where they can get into school. And my dad and my mom both came to the U.S. from Taiwan in the early 60s. And my dad went to University of Pittsburgh. He went to UNC, Indiana University. My mom went to, my mom was at Indiana University. So I was born in Cincinnati. Before that, my parents got married in Bloomington, Indiana. So I'm kind of I'm from Indiana until the age of 8. Born in Ohio, moved to Indiana. And, not a lot of Asians then, right? If you think of Indiana in 1974, I have this vivid childhood memory of my father making tofu, because, soybeans are considered animal feed in the Midwest. And so I remember my dad making homemade tofu in pots and cheesecloth around the kitchen. So we lived under pretty modest circumstances. This is before the explosion of Asians in American life. And so we did that. And so those, my parents were librarians, like you said. We grew up under pretty modest circumstances, and I have a brother and a sister, and there were 3 of us. And my sister was, eventually we discovered that my sister had what we now call autism. But we didn't know that when I was a kid. So grew up with autism in the family. Having somebody with a disability in the family is pretty strange. But we carried on. She eventually got diagnosed, started getting help. But that was it led to a pretty unusual childhood. I mean, like we didn't speak Chinese, we didn't speak Mandarin in the household, because the doctor said, well, your sister Karen should have a simple environment and not get too confused. So no Mandarin in the household. So I grew up not speaking Mandarin, which is like this kind of like cut in my parents' culture to our generation. Mm-hmm. Anyway, this is all a very long story, but as a result, academic life was important to me. Went to school, like you said. I went to college pretty young, which was kind of unusual. Showed up at Caltech. I was 15 years old. That was the one place where a nerd like me could eventually um, be accepted. I showed up as a nerd. I left as a nerd, but by the time I left, I was campus social chair, and so because if you're in a place like Caltech, it's okay to be a nerd and be social chair. So, but yeah, that was what I grew up with, and I wanted to be a scientist from childhood, and I remembered my Karen's difficulty getting a diagnosis, and that was something I knew about at the time that I did my neuroscience research. So it's this funny background. Like I said, growing up in the Midwest, from I don't know, homemade tofu to I don't know, being a professor at Princeton.
Hmm. Hey, I just wanted to let you know that Big Asian Energy is officially out, and you can go and pick it up anywhere you buy books, Amazon, Barnes & Nobles, etc. If you've ever felt like there's something stopping you from reaching your full potential, if you've ever felt like you want to have that unstoppable charisma and confidence in the work that you do, as well as just the way you show up in life, this might be the book for you. It is a book that is jam-packed with research studies, advice, case studies, stories, and of course, so many different techniques and takeaways, including communication, as well as mindset, as well as confidence, and all the other topics out there. It just won one of the best books of 2025 on Amazon. So if you haven't checked it out yet, go take a look. And finally, if you have a few seconds, can I also ask you to leave a quick review for Big Asian Energy? It not only means the world to us to hear from you, but more importantly, it does absolutely help us in reaching more audiences. I hope you're having an amazing day, and thanks again. There was an interesting piece of study that when I was looking some stuff up about you. I mean, you used neuroscience and specifically how the eye moves and to prove something about the way New Jersey's ballot design was influencing votes. Is that?
Yes, there's this crazy thing in New Jersey that I helped basically end, which is that in New Jersey, party bosses up until a couple of years ago would design the ballot. So if you imagine a rectangular ballot, normally you'd have an office that somebody's running for, and then a list of people who are running for it, and then you check one off. That in 49 states, that's the way it is. In New Jersey, it was different. If you wanted to, say, get the Democratic nomination for Congress or president or anything, it would be these columns where they'd be president, vice president, and so on, and then different columns, A through G or whatever. And party bosses would take whoever they wanted to win and put them all in one column. And then everybody else would be scattered all over. So the ballot is mostly blank with just these little names scattered all around. And if you were on the column, I proved statistically that column came with an advantage of 38 points. Okay, so and so as a result, no one who's on the column ever loses. No one who's off the column ever wins. And if you're off the column, that was the thing that was called being in ballot Siberia. Okay, so 2 years ago, there was a lawsuit. Andy Kim was running for Senate in New Jersey, and he was an outsider. He did not have endorsements from the party bosses, and he helped bring a lawsuit to overturn the system on the grounds that it took power away from voters. I was an expert, and I offered testimony showing that if you're on the line, it's 38 points if you're on the line. Some of that comes from having, parties helping you. Some of it comes from just the eye being drawn to it. And to your point, the eye is pulled to straight lines. Like as a visual neuroscientists know this, like your eye, if you see a line, you go to the line. And so I offered that testimony. The court was persuaded, and that got struck down. So that's gone now. And as a result, so New Jersey finally has a ballot design that is the same as the other 49 states, which is incredible that it took until 2 years ago. And Andy Kim used that ballot design. And as you may know, Andy Kim is now the junior senator from the state of New Jersey. So Senator Kim is in office because of the end of the county line. And so that was a thing I did. So that was an example of me taking my visual neuroscience, my scientific know-how, and turning it into something where regular people in New Jersey now have more say, more than 2 years ago, that's for sure.
What I'm really hearing here is there's a pattern, right? And I love patterns, and I don't have your nerd expertise and level of intellect, but I love the concepts behind this. And there's a pattern here where I'm seeing is how can science shift and make democracy better? And,
Yes.
I, and there's a pattern across your entire career where I'm seeing this, like, you're taking ideas like this, like, how do we use neuroscience of this? My question really is, geez, I mean, I feel like right now politics is really complicated, and I don't, whatever party people are, listening to, there's a sense that something is not working the way it's supposed to. The way the original ideas of what a democracy was, I studied political science in college, and I love the idea of democracies. It was a fascinating experiment, and I think we're still in it. How do you think that, in this next generation, can science help us build better democracies? I mean, aside from gerrymandering and the things that you're already working on, what is the kind of like the 40,000 feet view of this?
Oh, yeah. You've put your finger on it. So let me describe how I see the whole thing. So the founders thought that everyone should have a say in government. Now, as it turns out, the founders thought everyone meant white guys who own land. But okay, let us just attempt to ignore that for just a moment. Okay, but they did have a very good idea in there, which is that which is a wide variety of people within their universe should have a say in government. But there are things they didn't know about. They didn't know about political parties. They called them factions, and Madison said, well, factions cannot really take over at a national level because it takes so long to get from one end of the country to the other. It takes 6 weeks, say, to get from, I don't know, Georgia to Massachusetts, that you can't possibly have a national level faction. So there are other things they don't know about. They didn't know about podcasts. They didn't know about telegraphy. They didn't know about television. They didn't know about, shock jocks and radio hosts. So all these things have made our country, in some sense, much smaller. So those are things they didn't know about. I mean, look, Abraham Lincoln, the Gettysburg Address is handwritten because the typewriter was not invented until after he had died. So there are all these things that we have in our nation that make the nation smaller and faster and more efficient. But what that means is it makes it easier for there to be national factions that develop. So now we have these political parties that are pretty far apart from each other, and and we are all forced to choose up sides. And so sometimes political scientists call that polarization. So we're all on this one axis. We got to pick sides. And my colleagues at Princeton University and I have been thinking about that. I have a colleague, Simon Levin. Simon studies complex systems for a living. He's one of the most famous mathematical biologists around. And he's pointed out to me that when you have a system where you're forced to go on one axis, say from left to right or any kind of axis, he says that's not a stable situation because things can go whoop out of control. So, for instance, an avalanche is a bunch of pebbles that go down a hill together. A heart attack is a bunch of heart cells that start beating together and they can't get out of sync. They get stuck going together. And political polarization can lead to instability and even revolution. So here we are stuck in a time when we're all stuck having to choose sides. And so nearly half of Americans are unwilling to be part of either major party, yet they choose a party because they feel like they have to. Here in my district, in New Jersey, I'm running for office in the 12th district. In New Jersey, I was looking up people with Chinese last names, and it turns out that about 2/3 of people with Chinese last names in my district are not affiliated with either major party. They just don't want either. And you can kind of see why, because everything looks broken. So here we are hating our parties, hating our politics, yet we feel forced to pick one party over the other. And the whole system just feels like it's ready to break. It feels like it's going to explode. It feels like nobody represents us. And so my feeling about this is, can we fix it? And one way to fix it is to make Congress be closer to the people by doing things like getting away from gerrymandering. And I'm going to Congress to do that. And another part of it is to make Congress the branch of government that's in charge. So rather than having an executive branch that does what it wants, rather than have a Supreme Court that does things that seem out of step with what most people want, my theory, and it's not me, it's a lot of people's theory, my theory is that Congress should be in charge and we should elect Congress. This is not rocket science. So we elect Congress, they do the job. And so we need to elect them, and then they need to have the power to run the show. And right now, neither of those things is there. And, to your point, no wonder we feel kind of like disengaged and we don't want to be part of it. Because, I don't know, what are those people doing anyway? And so what we see is government shutdowns. What we see is, I don't know, attacks on immigrants, right? We
Mm-hmm.
see, we see bombings of countries where, I thought that Congress is supposed to declare war. Well, apparently not. And so we see all these ways in which the things that we learned in school.
Mm-hmm.
And you said you were a poli-sci major?
Yeah. Yeah. Studying
Oh,
international
okay.
relations.
Well, I don't know. Okay, well, you tell me. Have I said anything wrong? I mean, like, isn't
Absolutely
this what
not. No.
we're told? Yeah,
Yeah.
like we're supposed to. Yeah. So why are we not in charge?
It feels a little bit like we're living in wacky land sometimes
Yeah.
when we look at it, and it's not just the U.S. I feel like it's just kind of in the general state of the world. Recently, I had a friend send me an email that started with, "Hey friend, how are you doing in the general trauma that is being alive today?" And I laughed and I thought,
Yeah. Well.
right, like there's a
And
sense that like it doesn't matter what, like as you said, like the idea that we have sides feels to me very illogical, because the whole point of it is of a representative democracy, of like, having representatives, is that they should represent the group of people that they represent. And I thought that was
yeah.
a very good idea. But when you have this extreme polarization of everyone is going to vote in a single block, then okay, well, I don't know. The way I see it is that there are people who are going to be in, let's say, California, who have slightly different needs and feelings than the same party as somebody who is in Nebraska. And so I think it was a really good idea and experiment, and we need to bring some, I almost think, common sense. Like I would love to say science, but it feels almost ambitious right now. Kind of like, let's go back to what this is all about.
I mean, look at all the knowledge we didn't have 250 years ago. So we didn't have statistics. The field of political science barely existed. We didn't have this. We barely had economics. We didn't have anything resembling, I don't know, mathematical biology. We didn't have a knowledge of evolution. I mean, just think, like, we didn't have, my field, neuroscience, didn't exist. We know so much more about how our brains work, about how we make decisions, about how we panic, about how we get along or don't get along. The amount of knowledge we have is enormous. Like, this is like an incredible time to be alive. And yet we're using these legacy systems from 250 years ago that kind of got patched up after Lincoln, right? So, and then after this period after Lincoln called the Gilded Age, there was a patch up where, women got the vote, which is an incredibly important patch. Senators got elected by popular vote, an important patch. Alcohol was outlawed. That was a patch that got undone. That turned out to be that we
it made
reverted
sense
that
for its
patch.
time, for the problem they were trying to solve for its time. Let's say.
I would say
at least just some.
We did a backup. We did a backup and then we restarted the machine. Okay, so
Yeah,
that's right. All right, so apparently that didn't work. And then the civil rights era and immigration reform, where tens of millions of people got the vote, where immigration got changed in a way that led to people like you and me, our parents, coming to the U.S. And so there's been progress, but it's like you say, it feels like we need a reset. And just like 120 years ago, the progressive era led to some of those changes that I described. It feels like we need a reset. Like at 120 years ago, people thought the world was going to end. They thought that we were heading toward Armageddon. Like that. Like they literally thought that. And I am an optimist, but I have to admit I do feel a little bit of Armageddon energy these days. And so imagine AI taking our jobs and our billionaire overlords, like controlling our data and so on. And it does feel like maybe we need a reset. And I think you're right. Common sense has to have something to do with it, where we can take, I would say, a combination of the values that come from our common sense and using the best knowledge we can get hold of from people who've learned something about us, like who we are and how we work. Imagine, let's say, knowledge and common sense together to build something better. And I think that if we can make it through the next few years, I really want to be part of building that something better. And that is a big part of getting back to at the beginning of what you said at the start of this episode. This is a thing that drives me. I feels like a nation like the United States should be able to build a society that works for all its people.
Mm-hmm.
And California, Nebraska, New Jersey, New York, everywhere. I mean, just all over the country.
Mm-hmm.
And it would be nice to give a think as to how we're going to do that.
I couldn't agree more. I keep thinking about this because I was excited when I saw, your background, everything like that. And I gotta say, look, this is a show called Big Asian Energy. The fact that you're an Asian individual who's particularly a scientist who is, even just a representation of it feels in and of itself really refreshing. And I'm curious. I mean, now that you're in this race and you're actually in it, by the way, recently you got an endorsement from Andrew Yang. I just want to shout that out.
Yes.
Congratulations.
Yep.
That's huge, because I also see Andrew as a very much a leader and very much a ceiling breaker for Asian Americans in the political field. Why do you think there are not few, but why do you think there aren't more Asian Americans who are, in politics? Like you said, Chinese Americans who don't even have a party affiliation.
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know why that is. It is interesting that Andrew entered politics and is so transgressive compared with most Asians. I think a lot of it is just the natural arc of being an immigrant. So a part of the American immigrant story is you come to America and you first try to build a life, and building a life just means making a living. It means getting away from whatever danger you had in your home country. Then it involves, the arc is something like the first generation that's born, the parents want them to be, doctors or engineers. Like, look, I told you my dad wanted me to be a scientist. That was unusual. My mom wanted me to be a doctor. But she so wanted me to be a doctor. After I got my PhD, she kept on sending me articles saying, honey, there's a medical school in the Caribbean where you can get an MD in 1 year. Did you know that? And I'm like, Mom, I'm getting a PhD from Stanford University. Is this okay? Mom, I remember then I got a job at Princeton. Okay, I'm going to get back to your question, but
no. Like I'm loving this story. Oh my God, this is gonna be healing for a lot.
The day I got offered a faculty position at Princeton University. Now you might imagine that it was a good thing to get offered a faculty position at Princeton University. So I call home and I call my mom and I call my parents. I said, Mom, I got a job offer. That's an academic position. It's called a job offer at Princeton University. And she kind of paused and she said, did you apply at Harvard? I'm like, Mom, I got a faculty position, just very, very Asian.
Sam, this is so incredibly healing to hear. As somebody who also grew up, and my mom was like, yeah, like that. I'm sure so many people who are like, wait, even after getting into Caltech at 15, getting a professorship at Princeton, like that's your first question?
Okay, I would look. Eventually, they came to terms with it. My dad and mom eventually were pretty happy with what I was doing, and rest their souls. It was okay. I've healed it. Everyone's happy. But your original question is, what is it with Asians running for office, right? That was
much better topic to go into.
Okay, right. So roughly speaking, I think it's like this: when you come to a new country, first you got to make a living, and then if you value education, then maybe the things you do are become a doctor or an engineer, and then you can start thinking about other things in the next generation, like maybe being a scientist or an artist. And eventually you start branching into other areas. I mean, if you look at other immigrant waves in the United States, like people from Poland or Ireland or Italy, these are waves of immigrants who came to the US and they first had to build something in their own domain, and then they had to find a profession. And so it just takes time, because when you go to a new country, you got to make it in the new country, right? It's like in Hamilton, immigrants, we get the job done. And when you do that, there are a lot of issues of survival. So I think a lot of it is just time as time goes on. Now, as it turns out, a lot of Asian communities, whether it be East Asian or South Asian, like whatever there's a common feature often, which is valuing education and valuing family. And that does not necessarily mean, okay, I'm going to run for office. And so people start getting more community oriented. And I think they start getting more interested in finding ways to make a difference. And in Asian communities, building businesses is a way of doing it. I think it's just a matter of time. I think with time, we're seeing it come out naturally. And this is maybe why we're seeing so many more people from Asian backgrounds running for office now than say even 10 years ago. I think we're at that turning point, and I would say Andrew is part of that, and I'm part of that. And there's just this wave of people developing who think, maybe I should run. And back to your point, if I can be part of that wave and show people that it's possible to run, then in addition to every other reason I'm running, that's great.
100%. And I mean, that's what it is that we're seeing, is there's a movement that we are seeing. And I just get so eager, and I just get so impatient sometimes that I'm like, we need more, right? We need more. And it is about the amplification of our voices and our true beliefs that's underneath it. Because I think that when we are seeing other people who are speaking up from their perspectives, from their experiences, and unapologetically so, and I think that's a really big part of it, this kind of like, yeah, I know what I'm talking about. I'm an expert in this field. I have PhDs and Supreme Court citations and all these kind of things. I know a thing or two is not just an opinion. It creates permission and creates spaces for more people to want to see their own voice amplified, to see their ideas kind of being recognized out there, because it can feel a little bit like, well, what's the point? Why do I want to, step in front of a stage, step in front of people, face that degree of, questioning and scrutiny when I don't even know if I can make a difference, when I'm not seeing necessarily people like me making the difference and impact that I will want to make. So, thank you for taking charge and taking lead in being that wave of change makers.
Well, I appreciate your words, John. That's really heartwarming. I'll say my general feeling, not only among Asians, but I think among everyone in the United States, is that this is a really weird time. And I think that if we care about our communities, if we care about our country, everyone's got to step up and do something. And, it turns out the thing I chose to do is run for office. But I think that everyone has something to offer their communities. And, it's possible to run for local office. It's possible to be a good community member, be a good neighbor. And if we can get that energy back and build that energy, I think that is something, it's kind of this, we're living in such a strange time when a lot of things at the national level feel like they're falling apart. But one thing that's really hit me in the last couple of years is I've seen neighbors rise up and start doing things together, whether it be rallies to protest what they hate about what's happening, whether it be protecting their immigrant neighbors, whether it be showing up and participating in community activities. I think it's different in different places around the U.S., but in my community in Central Jersey, there's actually a pretty significant amount of energy of rising up, and people who are pretty normal people who are not crazy about politics, noticing that there's room to do something, and that maybe it's time for normies to get in there and do something to save the system from falling apart.
Yeah, you don't have to be a billionaire. You don't have to be, 4 generations of people who have ties in politics. You can just have a voice and hopefully some research and data, so you're not just throwing opinions around and create a movement. I think for so many people, politics can be foreign and scary. So thank you so much for explaining things like gerrymandering and the issues in it. I'm kind of curious, is there anything else that when if you're speaking to an Asian American community, what maybe do they not realize affects them more than they think in the world of politics, as you're more of an expert in it?
Oh, I mean, there's just all these things that are working in the background. I mean, things that we don't even notice until they're broken. So, I don't know, having...
because we know about, sorry, I don't want to interrupt, please, your time, but we know about things like immigration, for example. But to be honest, I'm not seeing a lot of discussions around for even like the Asian American communities, maybe even in your own backyard, that when you're talking to them, do you ever get this like, oh, I didn't realize this is affecting me?
Yeah, this is a really good question. Let's think about that a little bit because I don't have a good answer for you at all. Because the thing is, I'm such a government nerd. Like I think, well, doesn't everybody know that weather.com is actually the National Weather Service? Doesn't everybody know that
What?
national parks actually, I mean, I don't know, like, we don't need the National Weather Service. We go to weather.com. So, I don't know. We don't know that flight safety is a function of the federal government. We don't know that safe and pure food and drugs are
Oh.
required by law. We don't know that traffic safety is something that's regulated. We don't know that the federal government's job is to keep our data private, and so we're not supposed to be at risk of losing our personal data just because the Social Security Administration has it. So all these things, they're all kind of invisible. Like we kind of don't know that they're there. And then we find out when they're gone, like, oh, okay, well, I guess this is what happens when we have a foreign policy that does random stuff at unknown intervals. Then, oh, that's funny. Look, gas is now $20 more a gallon, $20 more a tank. So that's funny. And so there's just all these things that we kind of don't see until they get out of whack. And now that it might be harder to, in a few years, maybe we're going to have fewer cures for diseases. Scientific research is done at universities, but guess what? Most of that is funded by the federal government. Your taxes and my taxes pay for scientific advances. They train all the PhDs. They train all the students, like all my students at my university, right? Like my university was built through, tuition, through human resources, like the students come in, but also federal resources. And so we built up this, one of hundreds of great schools around the country, and my school is one of them. All this is built up by like this kind of agreement that we all had as a nation to build up higher education. So these things did not come from nowhere. We had a deal. We made a deal with each other after World War II to do these things, and like I don't know, like now we're like a thing on my news feed is all these things that we kind of took for granted are now kind of being stress tested, right? Like something like when we were kids, birthright citizenship.
Oh
When you're
boy.
born in the
Yeah.
United States, you're
Yeah.
a citizen.
Yeah.
And thanks to an
That's scary.
1898 Supreme Court 1898 case because of a guy named Wang Kim Ark. Okay, Wang Kim Ark sued because he was considered not a citizen even though he had been born in the United States, and he won, right? A Chinese man won, or a man of Chinese descent. And because of the Constitution, because of Wang Kim Ark, we're citizens. I was born in Cincinnati, so I'm a citizen. It's like these corny movies from the 70s where my baby is born in the United States and she's an American, and then like the lights and the music playing, she's an American, and
Yeah.
and like I don't know, like we all know that this is true, but all these things that we thought were just basic life in the U.S., whether it be weather prediction or being a natural born citizen, all these things are looking a little shaky at the moment. And it's kind of weird. Like I feel like there's this perverse voice in me that says, well, okay, maybe one possibly good thing to come out of it is we will actually actively think about the fact that the government's supposed to protect our privacy, or that babies born in the United States are American citizens. So anyway, so this is just I've gone off in a very random direction, saying many things.
No, I love all this, and I completely agree. Yeah, 100%.
Modern life is full of all this stuff, and we just don't even notice it,
Yeah.
So anyway, so I think that that's something that maybe people might want to put a little think into.
I 100% agree. Now we're going to come to a close, but I started this, and I really want to find out the answer to this. What was the story about you eating a cricket on CNN?
Oh, we're gonna do that. Okay.
If you want.
Yes. Among my many career accomplishments was eating raw crickets on CNN. So, all right. So, rewind. I'm interested in people having equal power, and at one point I went through a period of my career where I analyzed polls and developed ways to predict presidential elections. I started doing this in 2004. 4 years later, a guy named Nate Silver started doing it, and that became a website called 538. So polling analysis like gripped people's minds the way that, I don't know, the way that Polymarket grips people's minds now. And in 2016, a lot of people analyzed polls, including me, said, well, it looks like Hillary Clinton's probably going to win the election. And I thought, how do people
I believed it.
understand? Yeah, and a lot of people believed it. And so I said, okay, if Donald Trump gets more than 240 electoral votes, I will eat a bug. And I said that, I think I said it on twitter.com. There was a version that I said, I wrote a column from the New York Times, and I said something, I said if Hillary Clinton wins more than 320 electoral votes, I'll eat. So I had like kind of a bracketed bug bet, which is ridiculous. In retrospect, I wouldn't have done it. Anyway, so as we all know, Trump won that election in 2016. And I was going to go on CNN the following Saturday to talk about it. And this guy, Smarkanish, was hosting me. And the night before I was going on, he emailed saying, Professor, it's always a bad sign when people call me professor. And so he said, Professor, don't feel obliged to eat a bug on TV. And I'm like, okay, he wants me to eat a bug. And so I go with my sister-in-law, and we go to a pet store, and I buy this can of snake food. And so it was not a live cricket. It was worse than a live cricket. It was a raw, dead cricket. Okay, it was worse than a live cricket. Okay, so I go into the studio. I've got like the crickets. I've got honey, because you remember in the New Testament, like John the Baptist is like eating locusts dipped in honey. And so I go in there and I say, okay, we're going to do this. But right now, before I eat this, we're about to enter a period of partisan division. Donald Trump, if you're watching, you can make a bridge to the other side by appointing Merrick Garland to the Supreme Court. You can build bipartisanship. You can heal at a moment when we're really divided. And so Smarkanish is like, come on, just eat the bug, eat the bug. and I'm like, okay, I've had my say about the Supreme Court and how to build bipartisan unity, and now I'm going to eat the bug. And if you look it up on YouTube or whatever, you can see me eating the bug. And at that moment, the CNN studio guy, if I ever meet this guy, I have some thoughts, or this woman, whoever that is. So they turn up the microphone really high. And if you look, like I'm eating this cricket and it goes, it's like just this loud chomping sound. It sounds like I'm eating 10 crickets. And so, yes, I ate the cricket. As we know, Merrick Garland did not join the Supreme Court. But, it's funny because like people remember the stunt, which is sure. I owned it. I mean, look, I made a mistake. I made a wrong prediction and I owned it. When I make a mistake, I own the mistake. Mm-hmm. And I owned that mistake. And it was, it was gross. Okay. I do not recommend raw crickets as I would say protein milk. Yeah. I would far rather have protein milk than insect protein. That is my take on the whole thing.
Well, you know what? To me, that is a story of not just integrity, of actually following through with what it is that you believe, you say in your words and you stand for. And I think that authenticity and openness, that kind of energy, is what we need more of in the political realm. Right now, more than ever, we need that degree.
Would that our politicians all kept their promises?
Can you imagine? Thank you, Dr. Wang, so much. Thank you, Sam, for coming on the show, for sharing your knowledge and wisdom. For those who are listening, please go check out more about these issues, and specifically about Sam's current initiatives as he is pushing into Congress. Where can listeners find out more about you and what you're doing?
Oh, well, if you want to learn more about my candidacy for Congress, then I would say a good place to go is samfornj.org, samfornj.org. And if you want to learn about my thoughts about democracy, if you have a lot of capacity for learning all these thoughts, you can go to samwang.substack.com. So those are places to read about me, read about my candidacy, and read about all these things that we've talked about today with John.
Absolutely incredible. And you know what? I'm a subscriber, and I've started reading through some of those things. Very intelligent, very detailed. Like, we're not talking about fluff here. There's real information, real knowledge behind it. So thank you once again so much for your time, for your wisdom, and best of luck in the race for bringing science and all these things to the US.
Thank you, John. Thank you so much.
And finally, as always, if you're listening to this, if there's something here that resonated with you, don't forget to share it with a friend, and make sure that we're connecting with each other. This always is, at the end of the day, about raising up our community. One of the things we always say here is, when we rise together. Until next time.